Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, January 21st, and this is session A of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I'm Christina Rico, Executive Director of the Boston Civic Design Commission and Senior Urban Designer at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the Commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purposes of the record, Commissioners Easley, Evans, and Solano are present at this time, and we are expecting Commissioners Kotoridis and Manfredi later this evening. I'll let folks know once they've joined. Tonight's agenda will include presentations for a 10-year institutional master plan for Harvard University and a 10-year institutional master plan for Northeastern University. Tonight's meeting's proceedings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, followed by public testimony. And if Mark, Alexandra, and Gabriel have all been promoted, I just have a brief introduction before you guys can take the floor. So our first project, a proposed 10-year IMP for Harvard University, seeking Article 80D or IMP entitlement, contemplates approximately 720,000 square feet of new construction and approximately 138,000 square feet of renovation in 6 proposed institutional projects. This will be the second presentation of the proposed project to the Design Subcommittee, following an introduction at the monthly meeting on May 7th, 2024, and a subsequent Design Subcommittee meeting on November 26th, 2024. It's my understanding that Commissioner Solano is recused from this project, and that no other commissioners present at this time intend to recuse themselves. Is that correct? Great. A reminder to the proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes and we'll give you a 2-minute warning. With that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever they're ready.
Thank you very much, Christina. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Handley, part of the Harvard team. We're looking forward to presenting to you tonight. That was great context that I think enables us to jump right in. Thank you also to our commissioners, obviously, for your continued interest. With that, I see the presentation is up. So I'll hand it off immediately to my colleague, Alexandra Affian.
Nice to see everyone. And actually, I'm going to hand it to Gabriel Ramos from Sasaki, who will lead you through the slides.
Thanks, Alexandra, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here with you all today. All right, so just to get into it, when we last met in November of last year, we had presented our presentation specific to the 2025 IMP, and we had touched on 3 specific topics: massing as it relates to the proposed new projects, planning framework as it relates to a planning logic for the IMP area, as well as an overview of campus systems. And from that meeting, there was continued interest in the IMP area specific to the athletics area, relative to the siting and orientation of the tennis and squash racket center, as well as pedestrian circulation and wayfinding in the athletics area. There was additional interest in Soldiers Field Road crossings, the status of planned and future crossings, and we'll be getting into those in this presentation, as well as open space along Western Avenue, and specifically what are our considerations for open space in the long-term plan. Just to give an overview, as it's been a little bit of time since we last met, here is the 2025 IMP in context. It's really specifically about these 6 projects that you see on the illustrative map on the right. And half of those projects are carried over from the past planning effort undertaken in 2013. And those specific projects are the HBS Faculty and Administration Office Building, which will be new construction at roughly 110,000 square feet. The next project that's being carried over from the 2013 IMP is the Gateway project, and that will also be new construction around 300,000 square feet. And you can see that marked with the number 2 on the map right in Barry's corner. And third, the Harvard Stadium renovation and addition is the last of the projects being carried over from the 2013 IMP, and that's both a renovation of the existing structure and an addition. Getting into the newly proposed projects 4, 5, and 6, you see the Tennis and Squash Racket Center and McNoney Field building, both in the athletics area near the peninsula, near Soldiers Field Road and the Charles River. Both of those are new construction. And Crimson Catering is the final project included in the 2025 IMP. That's number 6, and you see that at the bottom. And that is a change of use and partial renovation of an existing structure. And the renovation square footage is roughly 9,500 square feet. And I'll just emphasize here, as you look at the map, we're showing a range of context as it relates to existing buildings, future buildings, as well as buildings that are under construction. And you can see that in the legend in the bottom left-hand corner, where we're highlighting across the street, across from North Harvard Street, from the Gateway building is the Goal Center, as well as affiliate housing. And you can see the renovation projects are colored with that lighter pink, and the new construction projects are colored in that darker pink. And here is the 2025 IMP in perspective. And you can see how the projects sit in the context, really ranging the span of geography of the IMP area from Soldiers Field Road on the left and the Charles River, and the athletics area with McNoney Field Support Building and the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, over to the stadium in North Harvard Street with the Gateway Project, Crimson Catering, and the HBS Administration Office Building. And you see in the context how each of the buildings is responding to the public realm conditions of its immediate area. Most of the buildings sort of being in line with that same sort of height and orientation of structure, with most of the notable development happening around the Gateway Project at 180 Western and the Goal Center. You can see how the Gateway building is responding to those developments with a comparable height and build out of that area. And one thing that I'll note, specifically for the stadium, in line with the inquiry regarding pedestrian circulation and wayfinding in the athletics area, once that project goes into Article 80, that process, there will be an additional lens of review as it relates to public realm enhancements around the stadium that support that larger circulation within the athletics campus. Getting specifically into the inquiries of the BCDC commissioners, we see the athletics area here shown in context, really highlighting the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, as well as the McNoney Field Support Building, which are essentially neighboring buildings. On this map, we're highlighting the primary building entries in the orange arrow. And you can see again the existing logic of how we sort of color-coded buildings based on existing being white, new construction being that darker color, and renovation being that lighter color. And specifically for the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, as it relates to the siting of the building, the goal here is really to maintain the existing court location and orientation, which is optimized for solar exposure, and to align new courts in accordance with NCAA regulation. The court specifically that you see here on the map shown near that number 1, the goal there is to renovate the existing courts, which have that same orientation today. The goal is to renovate them in place. And that then informs the building footprint of the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, which really respects the existing orientation of those tennis courts as it is today. Additionally, for this building, we're also thinking about development limitations based on easements in the area, as well as responding to the radial alignment of the Charles River and the overall sort of logic and structure of the athletics and HBS campus. For numbers 2 and 3 on the left, those are really enhancing these projects to, get a better understanding of how they'll fit into their context when they go into Article 80B, large project review. And that will entail a review to ensure that the building has a positive relationship to Soldiers Field Road, as well as locating new facility entryways proximate to existing athletic building entries. So you can see here on the map, on the right-hand portion of the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, that building entryway fronts onto that sort of courtyard that is created by the formation of McNoney Field and its building entryway, as well as Palmer-Dixon and the Bright Hockey Center. And finally, we're really thinking about improving wayfinding throughout the athletics area for greater legibility. And this is something that will be done globally, so it's not shown here on the map. But one thing that I will emphasize as it relates to the siting and orientation of the Tennis and Squash Racket Center is how it connects to the larger organizing logic of the campus in Allston. And you see there on that bottom key map, what we're really emphasizing is the different relationships that are taking place between the radial shape of the Charles River, as well as the primary thoroughfares that construct the area. And so just being mindful of how those geometries connect in space is the goal here. And one thing that I'll emphasize on this slide is that for the athletics area, if you look on the right-hand side of this map, looking at the additional building entryways shown in orange, you'll see that a lot of the primary circulation is already focused in where those existing buildings are that you see on the bottom right. And so these new 2 additional buildings really are bookending this existing pedestrian circulation that exists today. Looking at the long-term view and context, this perspective shows, again, how all the projects are sitting in their long-term context with a lot of that additional build-out and development happening north of Western Avenue and south of the future HBS administration office building. And really here we want to emphasize a few things, right? As part of these 2 new projects coming online in the Athletics Center, there will be an effort to promote placemaking and intuitive wayfinding by investing in key pathways that connect facilities so that as these 2 new buildings are added to this campus, there will be a very intuitive way of sort of navigating this area. And again, a lot of the core pedestrian corridors are already concentrated in those existing structures that I talked about earlier. Again, we're thinking about accessibility. So near Blodgett, the Blodgett steps, there will be some review of opportunities to enhance that to be more accessible for folks who are traversing the area. And along with this long-term plan, specifically on Western Avenue, we'll be providing opportunities for porosity and visibility into the open space network of campus through a mindful placement of buildings and setbacks. And additionally, the future HBS building, which you see there shown in that darker red, really is weaving itself into the existing context of the HBS campus and is in line with the existing height and sort of dimensionality of those buildings. And that new future development that you see south of that is really responding to the HBS administration office building in terms of keeping that same height and proportionality. And finally, with the Gateway project, as well as some of that additional development that you could see to the south of it, it's really thinking about just increased density at Bears Corner to be consistent with ongoing planning efforts that have emerged from the area. Getting more specifically into pedestrian circulation, which the commissioners had inquired about, this map here shows a range of things from pedestrian crossings to wayfinding opportunities, as well as primary building entryways in the athletics area, primary connections and secondary connections shown in the dashed line. And really here, we want to improve connectivity and legibility of the pedestrian network in the athletics area and make considerations regarding additional pedestrian crossings on North Harvard Street, as well as identifying wayfinding opportunities shown in that yellow circle to help illustrate how the campus can become more easily navigable in this long-term condition. The commissioners have also inquired about Soldiers Field road crossings, and this graphic here shows you both planned and potential crossings. The first 2, 1 and 2, the Telford Street Bridge as well as Everett Street are both funded and are sort of in the works. And the third one is a potential DCR future project. And you can see that identified with that 3 near Smithfield. And these, again, align with sort of the overall pedestrian corridors that exist today. Getting into the block plan for the long-term component of the IMP, we're really thinking about activating Western Avenue, and you can see they're shown with those sort of dotted orange areas, those long-term development areas. That's sort of the grain of development that we're anticipating taking place there. And you can see that we're identifying opportunities for porosity in those development areas shown in that dotted green line that helps indicate where folks will be able to sort of veer off of Western Avenue and into the campus, either physically or just visually, creating, site corridors for folks to look into the campus and see some of the activities that are taking place there, but also thinking about considerations for streetscape and public realm enhancements. And additionally, in the athletics area, you see those red buildings, both representing McNoney Field and the Tennis and Squash Racket Center, and those primary building entryways which connect to the existing pedestrian circulation taking place in the athletics area. And really here, the overall idea with this block plan is to allow the campus to respond to its existing organizational structure, thinking about those radial axes as it relates to the different thoroughfares that compose both the athletics area as well as the HBS campus. Additionally, you can see that for that long-term build-out along Western Avenue, we're carving out spaces for open space in between those buildings, shown in that green hatched area. And really the idea here is to strengthen existing connectivity within the IMP area by extending that axial layout of the HBS campus into the athletics area, as well as maintaining an active street wall along Western Avenue. And finally, in this block plan, what's really being illustrated here is that as these IMP projects fit into this view, they're really adding to the existing campus context, really are being add-ons to that existing logic of pedestrian circulation and wayfinding. And so to really summarize the presentation today, we heard from the BCDC interest in the siting and orientation of the Racket Center. And we've explained considerations for the proposed siting as it relates to its frontage in terms of the building entryways, but also its orientation. Really thinking about how those existing courts will be renovated in place and how that really informs the building footprint that we have shown on the map. We've also explained that we'll identify design features to be explored in Article 80B Large Project Review as it relates to additional enhancements to how that building connects to the public realm adjacent to it, really fronting onto Soldiers Field Road, thinking about ways of highlighting and activating that space, as well as providing clarity on the axial layout of the campus organization. The commissioners have also inquired about the Soldiers Field Road crossings, and we have shared a map and status update of planned and future possible crossings on Soldiers Field Road. And we have also dived into an illustration of the pedestrian network and wayfinding in the athletics area, really updating the long-term pedestrian network to show those connections and to really emphasize that those two new athletic buildings are really going to be bookending an existing pedestrian corridor that connects to the existing athletic facilities today. We've also identified potential wayfinding opportunities to improve navigability in the athletics area, as well as providing additional context on the North Harvard Street crossings. And finally, the commissioners have inquired about open space along Western Avenue and what the considerations for those are. And again, we've indicated that the planning intent here is to provide porosity and visibility into the open space network of the campus along Western Avenue in that long-term plan. And that's really by being mindful of how buildings will be sited along Western Avenue, such as to provide space for greenery and landscaping between the buildings to create those view corridors into the campus that provide that sort of break within the street wall facing onto North Harvard Street. And so with that, high-level overview of all of the considerations related to the athletics area, the Soldiers Field Road crossings, as well as open space along Western Avenue. We thank you for your time, and we yield to any questions.
Great, thank you, Gabriel. Appreciate the clear presentation and conversation. And I also wanted to let everyone know that Kathy Kotaridis, one of our other BCDC commissioners, also has joined us. So she'll be part of the comment period. Jonathan or Kathy, any comments to start us off? And Gabriel, can you put up maybe a site plan just so commissioners have something to reference while they're making their comments.
Just at a high level, I appreciate the presentation. This is the first time I'm seeing this, so I'm sensitive to acknowledging kind of where you were, what you've been asked to respond to, and the sort of clarity in which you've done that. And I appreciate the diagrams in terms of like street prioritization. I think they make sense in terms of how it again builds off of what's there, reinforces the radial alignment of the river. I think there's a logic here that all seems pretty sound. So again, I think this is all headed the right direction. I don't know, Linda, if you've knowing the project more, if anything you see that is worth chiming in on.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I wanted to give Kathy a quick
Go for it.
voice. Kathy, if you wanted to add any of your comments. And you're on mute, Kathy.
I'm still catching up in the presentation deck, so please go right ahead.
Okay. I do have a few comments, and I've been able to see this presentation a couple times and really appreciate you coming back. We always love it when you tell us what we commented on and then come back and tell us, you know, how you've had those internal discussions about those comments. So really appreciate you taking the time to create that chart. When we last were in subcommittee in November, I think we were all feeling really good about the kind of master planning that was done eastish of North Harvard Street. And I wanted to go back to, I think it's slide 9 that talks about the block structure in just a second. I think the concern was really in the area between kind of the oxbow of Soldiers Field Road and then also North Harvard Street. And I completely understand the diagram of showing the diagonals, and I think that the Harvard Business School side of the road does a really nice job following that really clear diagonal patterning. I'm still less convinced about the North Harvard Street, west of North Harvard Street. And so I just wanted a chance to kind of chat about that together now. One thing that I did was remind myself of what is on the site now of tennis. And so I actually pulled up an aerial, and I'm happy to share that on screen, or we can just talk about it. And the reason I wanted to pull it up is to really understand if those courts are aligned now, or kind of what you are salvaging in terms of the existing courts. And as you all know from kind of living and working there, the courts right now are in that area, but they are in groups of 2s and 3s, and in one case in the pavilion in a group of 6. And the reason that I was interested in going back and looking at that is that you know, part of the master planning and certainly the IMP process, you all are inheriting a really complicated structure to the west of North Harvard Street. The buildings align in an odd way. With one exception, you can't really cross North Harvard Street from the Harvard Business School side in any clear way. And so it just gives me pause to see buildings 4 and 5 being proposed in a way that that complicates something that's already really complicated. There's no real precedent there for shifting the grid here. I don't think it'll be read in the same way that it's being read on the east side of North Harvard Street. There's been a real clarity, and there's been a commitment to kind of keeping that radial on the east side of that street. It doesn't have a precedent on the west side of the street. And so one thing that we asked when we met with you guys in November was, is there a way to even think about the building portions of 4 and 5? So apart from the surface tennis courts and apart from the field that already exists, of creating a nod to the existing block structure west of North Harvard Street, either with a geometry of the proposed buildings that would give a nod to that geometry, or some other kind of landscape that would do that. And I'm not seeing any of that here, so I'd love to to hear a little bit about that. And then the second thing is, I don't really see any additional improvements to kind of the visual wayfinding that we talked about in November. If I'm coming from Western Avenue or I'm coming from North Harvard Street, how are we clarifying the already complicated pedestrian circulation system? A lot of times for first-time visitors who are coming for an athletic event, how is that being clarified and improved beyond just kind of drawing the lines of where you go? You know, what are the optical cues about where you go? Is there kind of some thought about how paving might help to clarify that pedestrian system? And so I'd really love to hear about those kinds of conversations you've been having.
I can jump in and address some of those questions. Thank you for your very thoughtful comments. To look at the tennis and racket center. So right now, as you mentioned, the existing courts are in sort of groupings of 2 and 3. And one of the goals of the project itself is actually, as we mentioned, to better meet NCAA guidelines. And one of their requirements or one of their preferences is that all courts are side by side in one long line, which is why that you can see the layout of the courts is different than it is today. And that's just in direct response to the NCAA guidance. So that was kind of a starting point for how to site this facility that we hope is going to function well over the long term. So we really wanted to meet the best standards for competition. One of the other, I know Gabriel had mentioned just thinking about how the tennis and racket center would relate to Soldiers Field Road. And I know that we talked internally about, could that be some kind of a terrace or some kind of a landscape solution, or just thinking about the design itself. And we cannot propose something right now because we're not in design, but we wanted to make sure that that's something, we are committing to look to exploring when we get to that point in the project. The footprint itself of the tennis, another part of it is just making sure that the entrances are engaging with that spine, that extension of Harvard Way that we talked about, how that would be a clear path that would, with all the buildings oriented on that path, and making sure that there's activity nodes, and that it would ease the wayfinding into that area. But also, I just wanted to point out that the university has established a wayfinding system through the Cambridge and Allston campus that you've probably seen, and you can see in this photo that a few years ago we did introduce these series of pedestrian wayfinding signs, and that was really just to make the campus easier to navigate. Each of these totems is customized for its place to ensure that the maps and the information are, speaking to wherever you are on campus. We've included a QR code on each of them so that you can tie into the online campus map that facilitates routing and navigation and provides real-time information. And so as the campus changes and evolves, the intent is that this system would be, we would look at opportunities to expand it, to update the information. And in fact, that's something we're doing right now as we look to the construction of the goal center, knowing that that's going to be an area of interest. So making sure that we include wayfinding that will get everyone there from different campus directions. So so I hope that helps a little bit just to understand the thinking of how we took your comments to heart and we really hashed it out a lot, and we're thinking about, how can we improve the sense of place on campus? How can we improve the legibility of the campus? But also knowing that the university, we have to have as few disturbances to the very many existing facilities and fields and programs that are on. This is like a jigsaw puzzle. There's so many moving parts, and there's not a lot of, we need to make sure we can accommodate all of our varsity sports going forward. So I think this is how we have been approaching it, and we have really been thinking through this. So thank you for all of your guidance.
Yeah, I appreciate that response. I mean, actually, Alexander, you chose a much better word than I could. I do feel like west of North Harvard is a jigsaw puzzle, and I wish that there was a way to overcome the complexities that exist with all of your good work at adding new buildings and adding new courts and adding new fields. My gut says that there's a way to do that. And, doing a lot of master planning myself, I see the courts, I see the 2 competition courts that are part of that. They want to be north-south-ish. There would be a way to kind of have those, match the grid if that were your preference. But I think what you're sharing with us and in November too is that it's not the preference to do that, even though there is space to do that. And so I would just encourage you to really take to heart the fact that this is an incredibly complicated district, that if the buildings cannot kind of match the structure that's been kind of built out in this district, and there's no way to even think about a kind of shift of a facade to help do that, that there would be real intent in terms of the landscape treatment to really help visitors to navigate through this district. I think we can just all agree that it's really hard.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, sorry, no, please, I don't want to interrupt you.
I can talk about block structure in a second, but I'll go ahead and take Jonathan's comment.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly build off of that, and forgive me, sometimes I struggle between what's a comment for an IMP versus an actual project, and I think I wonder if that building for the tennis center is almost sort of a release valve to maybe kind of acknowledge how maybe the shape of that can somehow better align, or sort of that I don't want to draw, but basically, I wonder if there's a way to sort of make that subtly better react to the sort of grid and be a tangent to that radial street that's trying to, again, better align to the existing buildings of the sort of hockey center and the track center. Because I think right now it is putting a lot of pressure on the sign to do a lot of work to resolve aligning to a framework. And yeah, I don't know if it's as simple as somehow is there any way to splay that line to kind of better align there? Again, I don't know, but maybe that's just something that's a detail or part of the landscape as well that can be fleshed out later.
You're drawing what we drew in November, Jonathan.
Oh, sorry. See, again, this is why I try to tread lightly on products that I don't.
No, but I think that it just is inherently, it just begs the question in our minds, and that's why we keep raising it. And again, I think where we're landing and kind of hearing the justification today is that it's your preference. It's your preference to orient it that way versus to kind of carry forward on what we would consider to be kind of an urban design framework. The grid that exists today, and by virtue of doing that, helping to improve the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say looking at the diagram here that's showing the black triangles to be the doors. I mean, I guess I'm just wondering if the moment of the building that is about entrance, that could be maybe a moment to acknowledge the grid that we're trying to create here, understanding the demands of clear span and whatnot for the sort of core. I don't know, 80% of the building, but I do wonder if there's a moment there just to, again, plug into this larger framework.
Can I also ask what the edge treatment is up and around Soldiers Field Road? And if that may present an opportunity to, not so much to address the grid, but to bring some coherence to this area of all different shapes of green space. I mean, the business school edge presents a very sort of front lawn sort of treatment, but I'm not clear what happens at the very edge along a fast-paced roadway, along where you have the dotted line.
Right, and of course, the fence is the element that carries through. But it is true that the amount of landscaping and the treatment at the business school is of a different scale than when you get to the athletics campus, which is a lot more of a working landscape from, using it as heavily used lacrosse fields and rugby fields, and there is, there hasn't been as much attention. It's a very remote part of campus that's, other than those that are using it for practice fields and competition fields, it's not a place that people tend to go very often. So there has been less, less attention in that area.
Got you. What is the public face of that area? Again, recognizing it's wrapped by a fairly busy roadway. What does it present as now, and what is the view forward?
We have we showed some views in our presentation from November, and I don't know if that would be helpful to show. Gabriel, do you have that? Might be helpful just to bring those up.
Yes, give me 1 second. For Mignoni, and this is the one for the tennis and squash racket center. And so you can see the building kind of in the foreground with that fence a little bit translucent, kind of running along the perimeter of Soldiers Field Road.
Got you.
And then I'll just flip back to the view of Mignoni Field, which is quite close to the tennis and squash racket center. And I think this is probably a little bit more helpful in showing that condition, that edge condition, pretty much between the athletics area and Soldiers Field Road. It's really just a fence and some landscaping.
Got it. Okay. Well, not to switch gears, but I did want to compliment you on the other edge of campus near opposite the ART and the focus on building some additional density and services there, and something of a gateway as well. I'm curious, it seems that you're promoting more of a pedestrian link between the other side of the river and what will undoubtedly be a very busy art center, but I'm curious what the public transportation is likely to look like in terms of stops and things like that along the edge of North Harvard Street as you're getting beyond Harvard Stadium.
So we will continue to rely on Harvard's very robust shuttle network, which has multiple routes that connect various parts of campus and that extend through different routing within Allston. So we will, we keep a close eye on shuttle demand. We tweak our routes as needed, but right now there are multiple routes 7 days a week that do access the North Harvard Street corridor to Harvard Square. And so we are, that'll be the first line of.
And that's university serving shuttle, I imagine.
It's university serving, but our shuttles are actually open to the public.
Oh. Good to know.
I know, I didn't know
I'm
that.
actually really thinking much more of the public's use of the theater at the other end of campus and how that will, how the public will reach that fairly seamlessly. And that answers my question.
Thanks, Kathy. Jonathan, any other comments to add? So, you know, Harvard has done amazing work, particularly on this side of the river with the research campus, enterprise research campus, and some of the work you've done at HBS. I still feel like the area west of North Harvard could really see some improvements by doing some realignment of buildings. But, you know, we are a advisory committee, as you all know, and it may be that as we're moving through an ADB process that we're able to kind of look at some of those options for orientation and courts. I mean, just doing a quick little takeoff myself right now over your drawings, you know, you can get those courts in a north-south-ish orientation and kind of shift that center around and not disrupt some of the other things that are happening in that part of the world. The Mignoni Field support building bothers me less because it is a smaller building set back and immediately located next to a field that you will retain in its, you know, existing form today. The tennis courts you won't retain in that same way. But I think that the rest of the work here is great. And given that we're kind of at an impasse in terms of some of the options that you're willing to explore west of North Harvard, commissioners, I'd suggest that we bring it back to the full commission with that caveat that we've kind of reached an impasse on the west portion and feel very comfortable with the east of Harvard Street. How do you feel about that?
I support that.
I think that's fair.
Okay. Christina, it seems like that's the alignment we wanted to take, and I think consistent with what we often do when we bring it back to full commission. You know, one of us might just explain the conversation from subcommittee and kind of talk about the fact that we still think that there are some improvements that would be beneficial west of North Harvard, and have that conversation with the full commission and then see where our recommendation ends up.
Sounds good. Before we call that final, do you mind if I solicit public
Please.
testimony?
Yes.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised, so we'll close the public testimony period.
Thanks, Christina.
And I'm happy to consider your summary the official next steps for the project. So to the Harvard team, we'll follow up with you about scheduling you for a monthly meeting. Thanks for everyone's time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, as Lizzie works to promote folks for the next presentation, we welcomed back Commissioner Solano. Good to see you. A proposed 10-year institutional master plan for Northeastern University seeking Article 80D or IMP entitlement contemplates approximately 2.25 million square feet of new construction and approximately 935,000 square feet of renovation in 8 proposed institutional projects. This will be the second presentation of the proposed IMP to the Design Subcommittee following its introduction at the monthly meeting on June 25th, 2024, and a subsequent Design Subcommittee meeting on December 17th, 2024. It's my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from the deliberations. And a reminder to the proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes. Planning Department staff will give presenters a 2-minute warning. And with that, we're happy to turn it over to the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready. Victoria or Corey, are you able to unmute yourselves? I see Corey Berg is a guest. Lizzie, we might need to promote Corey. Let's see, co-host. And is Victoria Evelina?
She's signed on, but I don't see her now.
Yes.
Let me just message. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
Did you see Steven's note just pop up there, Christina?
Stephen, sorry, did you intend to
Yes, he should be also a presenter,
No.
Stephen Schneider.
We never end our sessions on time, so I know we caught you guys off guard a little bit.
I know,
A few minutes
sorry.
early.
Victoria
That is-
joined and said, oh,
that
it's still
is-
Harvard.
I'm frantically messaging everyone. I think everyone logged in early and then was coming back.
It's all good. Christina, do you know if David is going to join for this second session?
I honestly I had not heard either way.
Okay.
I remain hopeful.
Okay, well, the
Laura, I
rest,
see your chat asking which commissioners are recused. I don't believe any commissioners are recused from this. Although it's possible that David typically recuses from Northeastern.
Hasim?
David.
and Freddie.
And Freddie, of course.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna pull up my. Oh, I have to. Okay, I can replace current share. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. All right. My name's Corey Berg. I'm the Director of Campus Planning. I'm joined by Victoria Avelina, John Tobin, Chris Herlick, and Stephen Schneider from Northeastern. And I will immediately be handing it off to Victoria to take you through the beginning.
Good evening, everybody. I am sorry I made you wait. I thought we started like right on time because it's also a public hearing, so I was mistaken. I'm sorry about that. So my name is Victoria Avelina. Thank you, Corey, for the introduction. I'm AVP for Campus Planning and Design, and I'm just going to kind of set the context a little bit for today's workshop and presentation because we heard a lot of really good feedback and clarifying questions the last time we met, which was before the break. And I just wanted to address some of the questions through a little bit of history on how the campus evolved over decades, because we can't talk about open space without talking about the built form. So, you know, a lot of the things we heard, just as a refresher, are really about legibility and connectivity and what is the hierarchy around open space, the scale, and how are the future projects going to define what Northeastern feels like, and how do you experience it as a visitor, as a member of our community, and as a neighbor. So a lot of questions around circulation. So I think we took a suggestion of Commissioner Linda Eastley and broke it out into two subtopics. So today we will only talk about open space, and connective tissue. And we will also talk a lot about our arboretum and touch a little bit on the history, and then what it is that we plan to do for the next 10 years to really enhance it. Next slide, please. So the diagrams are small, but I promise the images will be larger in the subsequent slides. But really interesting diving into how the build form evolved. Actually, the original location for Northeastern was not on the Huntington Avenue YMCA building, but on Boylston Street YMCA. That was damaged in the fire. However, that was our very original first stop. And then subsequently, we moved on to Huntington Avenue, which is where we built most of the kind of the more known, original, iconic white brick buildings. So by 1960, most of the white brick buildings were completed. It was a Shepley Bulfinch master plan, and I'll walk through some of those images in more detail. But it's interesting because the campus evolved around quads. And you almost can suggest that some of the quads were not really connected to the other quads. However, the buildings were interconnected, not only above ground, but also underground, which is kind of a unique aspect of our campus. I'm not going to say it's the only university that has underground connective tunnels, but it is a unique aspect of our urban campus. And then what really turned into Northeastern turned more into the residential campus happened around the 90s and was completed in 2001. And we can talk a little bit more, was the delivery of West Village, which was a Bill Ron master plan. And then the most recent development, which was really the first big move across the MBTA right-of-way, was the expansion of EXP and ISIC, which is when we academic uses moved across the tracks. But we already had a lot of residential facilities, and of course, Columbus Avenue, a couple of administrative buildings on the Columbus Avenue. So let's go to the next slide. But you see how it grows, and there's no open space, and it suggests that there's no context. But of course, there was a lot of development along Huntington Avenue before 1930. And why we really like this aerial view, number one, and it's an old image, and I couldn't get rid of those numbers. They're just from an older analysis that was done. Number one is really where the Krentzman Quad was identified. Number two is Cullinane Hall, which was the historic automotive school. And that really set kind of the boundaries for where the university was looking to expand. At the time, the back, which is where the library is, it was really a lot of the kind of industrial uses for the rail. There wasn't an orange line at the time. It was just the train. It was the train that was connecting to New York and New Haven, and the state was pulling back on some of those kind of industrial uses. So Huntington was already defined, and then we slowly started expanding at where we now know is the Krentzman Quad. Next slide, please. So interestingly, so this is Robinson, which was our first building. It was built in 32, I want to say. I'm now forgetting my numbers, so don't quote me on that. I believe, no, this is from 41. So this is, if you see, the Krentzman was actually facing Robinson. And along Huntington Avenue. So the Krentzman Quad was then rotated to face L Hall, which is the building that we now know as the taller building was the Flag. But the space was always defined as kind of the key open space. And then the building that you see in the front, if you can point at it, was a, actually, maybe I can point, it was a pointer. This building right here is actually phase 1 of MUGAR, which is now going to define our East End research quadrangle. So those were 2 original buildings. Across Huntington, what you see is the Boston Opera House, and then the Boston Cold Storage Facility, so an industrial use. Those 2 buildings were consolidated and next slide, please, and torn down around the same time to then now become the white brick buildings for the residential part and the freshman dormitories. The White Hall, which we recently had to demolish because of structural issues, was actually one of the first buildings. And I really love this photograph because you actually see the rail yards in the front, and the original white brick buildings were pushing right against the rail yards. And along Huntington Avenue, we were really trying to develop both sides. So the fence you can see in the back, lots of very young trees in some parts. It looks very different now, but this is, I really like this image, long view. Next slide. This is 96. Interestingly, quality of photographs was better in the 40s than it is in the 90s. But this is a view down overlooking Wright Ruggles. I'm sure you can orient yourself pretty easily. And this is a site in the front of West Village. So lots of parking lots and streets that were consolidated in order to develop the residential campus. And this is really what you would say is like the most transformational part of right now, so I'm busy. That was the most transformational part of Northeastern from a built environment, and because it brought so many more people onto campus that were full-time residents. There was, the commuter options were significantly reduced, and this was becoming a lot more residential experience for students with a lot of the amenities. The library was built in the 90s, a lot of our research buildings, and a lot of development along Forsyth Street connecting to Ruggles Station. The next slide, please. I'm going to skip these. This is the view of West Village, and then next. And then, of course, this is kind of the defining open space on Columbus Avenue, and general investment from Northeastern into, as one of our largest community agreements was the maintenance, the funding of the capital project for the Parks Department of the Carter Playground, and the subsequent investment on Columbus Avenue with the defining of this square, of the research square that is, active, modern, public realm, and that is kind of where we're wrapping up the 2013 master plan. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Steve Schneider, who will talk about our arboretum and kind of our current conditions and our vision for the future of open space. Steve.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, everybody, for hosting us tonight. I'm Steve. I'm the Director of Horticulture here at the university. I wanted to talk about the Arboretum, and we're a relatively new part of the institution. We became accredited in 2019, but it took my predecessor about 40 years to green the space to get us to the point where we were able to meet the criteria of what an arboretum, according to the ArbNet community requires. And I'm very excited. In a previous life, I was at the Arnold Arboretum for 20 plus years, part of the Emerald Necklace. And one of the fascinating parts about my new job is tending and stewarding this green space that happens to be sandwiched in between not just the Emerald Necklace, but the Southwest Corridor. So it's a very exciting aspect of things. Next slide, please. So, when I took the job, when I came back on board to Northeastern in June of 2021, we created a vision. We really wanted to take this idea of a curated plant collection in an urban space to create, connect, and inspire. And that just didn't include our faculty, staff, and students within the Northeastern community, but really reaching out to the external community to help both bring people and families and whatnot into our space, but then also to get out to their spaces and inspire them to preserve their urban canopy. We like to think that we partner and work very well with Boston's urban forestry plan, and work very closely with Todd Meester and Max Ford Diamond, and we bat around a lot of interesting ideas to try and keep our urban landscape going. And so next slide, please. So one of the things that we want to do, we are a level 2 arboretum, and without getting into too many details, one of the criteria is that in order to achieve that level, one needs to maintain at least 100 different taxa. Taxa includes not just species, but varieties and cultivated varieties. When I arrived here in June of 21, we had 140 different taxa. We are now working, we've been doubling down to try and expand our plant diversity in the space. And we are happily up to over 500 different taxa at this point, which is one of the requirements of our to reach level 3, in addition to greater care within our curation department, which would mean dedicated staff, and of course making sure that everything is mapped, labeled, and accounted for. Our education and research opportunities that we currently have just within our campus are growing. In fact, this evening I just left got done presenting to a class that is going to be working on looking at forest farms in the city, as well as mushroom gardens. And so, within a very, very urban space. And that really is the hallmark of our collection. The Arnold's collection was a very different experience than what I experience on a daily basis here. We are tight, we are cramped, but we, I would say, represent well what the urbanscape, or the typical urbanscape experiences more often. And we're doing our best to try and figure out what grows there, what doesn't grow there. We kill a lot of things, we get a lot of things to grow quite well. And so that's one of the things that we work on. And again, reaching out to our communities. One of the things we like to mentor. We have been mentoring different groups within the city, groups that are interested in, once they learn about our story, they're interested, well, how can we protect our trees? How can we curate our own collection? Can we be an arboretum? And the answer is yes. And so far we have worked with, we've successfully guided and mentored 3 groups, one on Mission Hill, the other, if you know Thoreau Path in the West End, and then just recently, as of last week, our friend Franco, his in the Southwest Corridor, he said that we got notice that their application was successful. So not only do we mentor and guide these folks at making application, but then afterwards they become almost part of the family, to then enter into a maintenance phase for their arboretum, and then spread the good word and see how many other communities we can get to start thinking about preserving their own canopy. Next slide, please. So just some quick stats. The campus itself in Boston is 72 acres. Only 11 and a half of that is green space. And when I say green space, it is shared space for sure. So it's not 11.5 acres to just grow plants. I would love that. But it is a shared space. So we have to share with people, we have to share with events, utilities, all kinds of things that that compete with what it is that we're doing. But in spite of the fact that we have those pressures, we have quite the plant count, but really it's that number, it's that diversity that we've injected into the collection of like I said, over 500 different taxa. And so that's the museum and curation end of things, but then also beauty and well-being. We make sure that everything, that the space is welcoming, that it is beautiful. And just a little bit of bragging here. PGMS, which is the Professional Grounds Management Society, they have this award that they give out. It's kind of like the Oscars of the nerdy horticulture world. And this year we were awarded the 2024 Honor Award for the urban college campus, which is a great honor and reflects not just the work that we've been doing the last few years, but the work that the university has been investing over the past 4 or 5 decades. So very proud of that, very excited about the future of this space and how this space can better inform other urban spaces, that yet you can grow big trees in a small area. And I think with that, I'm handing things over to Chris.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us tonight. My name is Chris Hurlick, Senior Urban Designer for Northeastern. I'm going to take a look at the existing open space network on campus, starting with some of our regional context, and then we'll zoom in. So you can see here the campus at center. We are surrounded by a number of important landmarks and important green spaces. The next slide will show a little more diagrammatically how all those connections are made. Obviously, we have the Back Bay Fens and the Emerald Necklace, the Southwest Corridor. Some proposed off-street networks include the Roxbury Family Connector and the growing South Bay Harbor Trail. And then there are also some on-street non-motorized regional connections that are important to us. And of course, you see, again, at the center of all of this is Northeastern's campus, which is really at a crossroads of all of these regional networks. Right now, our open space network is, we like to think of it as a series of interconnected, intimate rooms. You know, it's not really a traditional campus. There are these signature green spaces that punctuate the paths and some of the important moments on campus. But most of our green spaces and open spaces have been created in a really piecemeal fashion, you know, as things are developed building by building or acquired parcel by parcel. It accompanies acquisitions and redevelopment in a way that most campuses maybe don't develop, especially non-urban campuses. So a lot of our spaces have developed from interstitial spaces. And, you know, I think historically they may have been parking lots, or maybe not even full parking lots, but places where you could stash a few cars or you could stash some service vehicles. And as we've grown and incorporated those pieces into more of the heart of the campus, we've worked really hard to make them feel more connected, more part of something whole, and, you know, continuing Steve's work, greening them as much as possible to make them beloved spaces that serve more than just service needs. You had asked us last time, or we had offered last time, to look a little bit more closely at the character of our spaces for you. So we have all these different typologies. You can see here listed in the top right. The color is, of course, associated with their position on the map, and you can see some statistics on the total area. We feel a pretty effective distribution of these different space types across campus. You know, we have a good cadence of a connective piece and then a quad and a connective piece, or a connective piece and a plaza. That being said, navigating this campus can be quite difficult because it is so intimate, because there are so few significant view sheds. Visitors and even students often find it challenging. So we really want to make sure that we are continuing to improve that with our efforts. We see the Huntington-Forsyth intersection as a front door and as a big part of helping people understand when they have arrived on campus. Right now, you can see really just service use is the only thing visible at that location. And talking about some of the other spaces that we'll get into later on the East End, we feel like in the future could act as a gateway. It doesn't right now. Again, with Matthews Arena, everything surrounding it is serviced, and it's only once you get past Gainsborough and the Gainsborough Garage that it starts to feel more like a space that is pedestrian friendly, that is oriented towards a campus. As I mentioned before, we have had space constraints, and Victoria talked about this. You know, we have not developed in a traditional campus sense, so the opportunities for these traditional campus green spaces where all the buildings are oriented around them are few and far between, and frankly we don't see a lot of opportunity for more in the future. It's more about enhancing the ones we have and being very strategic moving forward. As part of the IMP work, we have done a lot of polling and questioning for students and staff on campus. We've collected a lot of feedback on open spaces among a number of other topics, but we thought these are the most important to relay to you. We're looking at what people believe are the heart of campus, iconic spaces on campus, favorite green spaces. You can see that many of them are the larger signature open spaces that we have, such as West Village Quad, Centennial Common, and Cabot Quad, but a lot of them are interstitial, bordering on back of house in some cases. They are even adjacent to service. So there really is a flexibility to our spaces where we have a lot of pedestrians in places where we also have a lot of other uses, and we are cherishing the smaller spaces off of these larger spaces because they really do serve an important purpose. We've taken a look separate from the IMP, but alongside the IMP, a look at our goals and approaches for open space. The goals probably are not going to be that shocking, so I won't spend too much time on those. They are goals you might have for any collection of open spaces, but I think the approaches are really where we want you to focus your attention on this slide. You can see we've indicated on the right where they align with our IMP goals. We're focusing on gateways and threshold moments. We want to remove barriers to accessibility, building off of the biomorphic, biophilic features and the intimate spaces, the close-knit spaces that we have. And something else that we want to use to tie architecture to open space is unifying the campus experience through enhancing indoor-outdoor connections. I know we're very low on time, so I think with that, I will hand it off to Corey to continue with our a quicker look at our proposed spaces.
All right, I'm going to try to make this as fast as I can because I know we're short on time, but I'm clicking through our principles. You've seen these already. A number of them are tied to our open spaces though. This was one of our big ideas that we shared in our last meeting with you all. This was the sustainable and resilient public realm, but really bringing this back to focus on those northwest connections that we're going to be making through a greening of Forsyth Street, connecting the Fens and the Southwest corridors, but also the east-west connections that are almost desire paths through our different green spaces, and focusing on that kind of internal circulation network. So this is our overall open space network that we are proposing here. You'll see there are 3 pretty substantial changes. Just to go back though, Forsyth Street and the redevelopment of these key redevelopment sites along that street really creates this opportunity for Forsyth to be reinforced, as I said, as that north-south connection. But in addition to that, I think most substantial is this real greening of the former Cabot site. So introducing Forsyth Park at the corner of Huntington Ave and Forsyth really as this gateway or entry point into the campus. This we see as probably the most dramatic transformation. And really is also introducing, as I mentioned, this kind of path through what was previously or is currently a very large footprint and really kind of a desire path for students, faculty, and staff cutting across the campus. In addition, we've got a greening and through the redevelopment of the UR complex, a reorientation slightly of what is called Greenleaf Street and Hollenborg Way. We have a comparison slide later, which you'll see that at. And then lastly, the third kind of big significant move is the East End. Obviously, I've been to you all to present the 262 St. Botolph multi-purpose athletic facility here, but we've taken another look and acknowledged and responded to your feedback about what we're doing on this corner here, and are introducing a pedestrian pathway through here that responds to the Robinson Quad. So here is what our proposed framework looks like. Again, introduction really of a new quad of sorts, thinking of this as a bit of an urban square. You'll see this pedestrian path cutting through along the East End, and going just to a zoom in of our two neighborhoods or two campus communities that we focused on with you all previously. This is the East End campus. So on the right side, we've got the 262 St. Botolph multi-purpose athletic facility. We've actually adjusted the edge condition here. And so what we are introducing is a double height space. This will serve as almost another gateway of sorts. So as you're walking down St. Botolph from Mass Ave, you're really being greeted by this really welcoming plaza. Again, this will be a really dynamic, active ground floor use, and we'll have an indoor connection through to the current science quad that sits between Mugar and Robinson. Curry is also a desire path. We have a lot of folks that actually flow through that building. So this is a nice continuation of that desire line. And this is what it looks like just in a bit more detail, really greening this edge condition and introducing that plaza. This is the second neighborhood, Forsyth Park, again, situated right along Forsyth Street, and that north-south connection. You'll see we've really thought intentionally about some of these pathways and connections through the center of the campus, while working with some of the existing buildings and existing fabric that are kind of legacy buildings. And then here it is again in just a bit more detail. And I'll just close with a comparison slide to open it up to a discussion.
Corey, thank you. We don't often take the time to kind of step back as you guys have and you've done a great job giving us a retrospective, starting with those initial kind of diagrams showing your evolution from the, around the 1930s and before, and then to present day was really fascinating. And I can say that in the years I've been on BCDC, we've never had a director of horticulture join us. So Steve, thank you for being the first. And it was,
I hope not the last.
And it was just great to get all of these different perspectives. So I have a number of comments that I jotted down as you all were going through your presentation. Commissioners, I think we're focused on open space today and on kind of urban design comments around open space. So I wanted to open the floor to everybody and see what we have to give to the team.
I'll start with just
Kathy?
a few comments and questions. First of all, this was a great presentation for all the reasons that Linda just enumerated. And it was really particularly good to see your flow-throughs of the campus, at least in plan view, to help really understand how you see people moving through. And I particularly like the north-south flow from basically along Forsyth and the new area around the former Cabot. And it just, I think that desire line, and I guess I'd like to ask you to clarify if the desire line of Forsyth from the park at the well, I guess at the very north, all the way through goes to the MBTA, or if it flows beyond that. Is that a crossover at Ruggles Station and through at the very bottom?
There is, yeah, there is a bridge across, you're saying at Ruggles?
Yes.
Yes, so this is a pedestrian connection right now, the train station.
Okay. That's great. And it will take you all the way down to Tremont Street.
It does, yep.
That's great. But the one that I'd love to understand better is the one at Hertig Cullinane, where you talked about passing through that corner of a building through which one will be able to walk through in a fairly obvious way. And I guess it wasn't totally obvious to me. So I'm wondering if maybe you could hint at what's happening.
Yeah, if I may jump in for this one. Yeah, if I may jump in really quickly. So the biggest change we made here is one of the suggestions we heard last time was that we should push the Hertig Cullinane redevelopment all the way to Saint Botolph to create a street edge, to really define Saint Botolph as an urban street. But and we like that, and I think it makes a lot of sense with redevelopment of the arena and Gainsborough Garage and to really create a new spine. But we wanted that to also be public space that could be walked through. So the way we imagine it without fully designing the building is that it would be one of the POPs, privately managed, publicly accessible, just an atrium. So it does create a street wall, but it is also an indoor covered open space that allows you that kind of flow and connection out to Mass Ave past the arena or to the arena project. So because initially we had it pushed back last time we came to BCDC, it was pushed back, and there were like series of smaller plazas, and the feedback we got that it felt like leftover space, and can you define the street in a more intentional way? So this was our, without designing the building, this was our solution. And then all of the service would happen from the MBTA track side, and most of the loading would happen between Hertig Cullinane redevelopment site and Gainsborough Garage, and could happen kind of on the interior.
Yep. But that would have a limited amount of access at various times of the day or night. Is that correct? The front and
No, we would have it open like we do similarly to the atrium of ISEC on Columbus Avenue. You can walk through it. All the labs are closed and the classrooms are can lock, but the atrium space and the cafeteria, you could just walk through and across the building. And also 840, which is what we're hoping to start construction this fall, you can walk through the ground floor.
Got you.
Our student center is kind of similar. That's open until midnight. And so folks just pass through there.
Great. Thank you. Although I have one other question. Is the commemoration of the First World Series still going to remain on campus? And I'm trying to remember, you have some sort of a monument there, if I'm not mistaken.
We do even have a World Series way.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
that will remain.
That will remain.
Awesome.
That was a fun bit of trivia, Kathy. I didn't realize that existed there. Lara or Jonathan?
Could we look at a bigger plan, meaning more of the campus and with the improvement shown, and maybe zoom in on that?
Sure. Is this zooming?
Yeah. I would like to hear, I couldn't help but notice when you were going over the different percentages for the different spaces on campus, it was hard to ignore the 33% or so service area. And so I wanted to understand a little bit about, well, how that works around the campus and its relationship to the open spaces that you're proposing.
Can I take this one?
Yes, Chris, go.
Sure. So some of that, as I mentioned, does include parking. So there are two lots that are shown here, the north lot and the Ryder lot, which do actually take up a significant portion of the overall service area. But what's important to remember about pretty much all of the remaining service typology is that they're shared. It is not exclusive to service vehicles. Some of them are popular pedestrian paths, even though that's not their primary use. And so even though we're showing areas that, or showing what seems like a large amount of service area, it is all accessible to pedestrian. And to date, with essentially no conflict, there are pedestrian paths that accompany them, whether it's sidewalk or something even more dedicated, where, you know, trucks can maybe just access the buildings they need to access via a pedestrian path. And similarly, some of the connective pieces are open to service vehicles. So there's some transferability between those two. And one thing I did want to point out is actually we are starting with 33% area dedicated to service, and we're going down to 27% area service, according to the plans that we're showing here. So the nature of the space, the service spaces, does vary pretty significantly, but the majority of the service spaces are open to pedestrians, accessible to pedestrians, even if their primary use is to make sure that the buildings can be served. And we see students, you know, I'm sure many of you either know college students or have had college students in your home at some point. You know that they will walk where they want to walk. And even if we say this is a service area, if it's the shortest route, they're going to take it. So we really do our best to make it as flexible as possible. And you know, it might not be the right place for a dedicated planting zone that's important to Steve's goals with the Arboretum, but they are still very functional places for pedestrians.
And I understand all of those pressures, particularly with campuses where you have interior spaces and the need to service buildings. But I would encourage you, as you continue to look at the detail of this, and this is impossible to show now, but I would think hard about what the character of those spaces are. I'm assuming that, like many institutions, there are limited times that service trucks are able to service the building. And so that's a lot of hours where there aren't trucks. And I don't know whether it's through materials or, you know, something else that could help to make those spaces feel a little more connected. And so it's kind of the idea of every surface, every space should feel like it's part of the landscape, right? The landscape is just a big word, and it may or may not be planted, though I'm sure Stephen will see to it every square inch that he can will be. But I would just not draw too many lines and think about how those could be incorporated into the experience more than anything. They're necessary. They're absolutely necessary. But I think there's potential here. You've done so much already, and students will go where they want to go. But I think having the outward face that every space is important to pedestrians and students is an important message.
Good point.
Yeah, thank you.
I suppose quickly building off of that, one thing that I am struggling with a little bit is understanding the sort of pedestrian connections. And I'm looking at the I guess for me it's diagram page number 19, the one that has the kind of orange arrows, the sort of the open space network. And I guess I might have an older version. So I guess it's 22 on yours right now. one more. Yeah, that one. I guess what I'm struggling with is it looks to me as if every path is a major pedestrian connection that kind of goes through the campus. And I guess what if how are we using this diagram to maybe perhaps, or is there a better opportunity to just sort of create a clearer hierarchy? I get it in terms of the darker orange is pedestrian and vehicular versus the lighter one is just pedestrian, but I guess I'm curious for a little bit more maybe with an attitude about how to actually treat that streetscape to just sort of enforce yeah, an attitude of hierarchy, what makes one different than another. How can we mitigate some of the conflicts in terms of vehicular traffic? And maybe that's a degree of detail that is beyond this level of what this diagram is trying to do, but I suppose maybe that's kind of what I'm maybe looking at, trying to understand if there is an opportunity, and maybe it could be that there isn't, to create clearer hierarchy to, I think I saw somewhere in the slides that, people really love the sort of bigger, open, sunny signature green spaces. Does that then create an opportunity to just use that to then anchor a different attitude about what that circulation looks like to get there versus another path, right? But there's a lot here that I'm really trying to get into, and I think a lot of the the sort of network of different kinds of spaces, the quad versus the plaza, I think all of that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, even if I go maybe 2 slides after this one, where it's the open space, yeah, that one there. Yeah, I think for me, I'm looking at those black lines and I'm wondering, like, what is it about them that maybe wants to be different when we think about how do we connect these spaces across campus into the city? How do we, yeah, just acknowledge and deal with the sort of some of the conflicts around Huntington and Forsyth? But a lot here, a lot of good stuff, and that's probably the one spot that I'm really trying to see where the place is to dig in deeper.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think that you're right. That last diagram was really more of a conceptual diagram, not as much detail as something like this. And this is even really just showing the priority desire lines, I would say, in thoroughfares. There's even an additional, so this is a beautiful sculpture garden and kind of a meandering path south of the student center. So believe it or not, I think this is the high level, like, priority paths. But I do think we could probably do a better job of maybe just identifying maybe the different characters, or maybe there's a way of prioritizing what those pathways are, and acknowledging the balance of the service need also versus pedestrian and how we treat those.
And maybe that's my question to you, is that what is the is there a need in terms of, does this begin to imply where wayfinding wants to go, or like, I think the location of all these programs makes a ton of sense, and
Right.
I guess I'm wondering, why do you have the black lines? Is there something that we're trying to then that you're trying to have us opine on in terms of how these things are connected? I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm just trying to wondering what is the opportunity for design there that you should be thinking about, even if it's something that happens at the next level of development.
Right. So I think for us, it's both explaining what the focus is, which is improving the east-west connection on campus, but also where do we want to guide investment in terms of removing barriers, yes, improving wayfinding, improving lighting, because a lot of these places and spaces already exist in one form. And as we phase development over the next 10, 15 years, where are the opportunities for investment? Because it's not sustainable to do everything at once. So these kind of, especially the east-west connection, connecting Centennial to Snell Library Quad, to Robinson, and to Multipurpose Arena and that plaza, that kind of connection within the campus is probably the one where we would want to invest the most in wayfinding, removing barriers like curbs, creating more accessibility and more visibility. And then there's the diagram that you looked at previously, my colleagues are going to be very excited because they argued to remove the diagram and I insisted to keep it. So you guys can use that for the rest of January. But that is an older diagram, but it does speak to the fact that there are a lot of absolutely gorgeous open space assets, and how do we connect and how do we improve safety and connectivity to the fence? How do we improve safety and connectivity to the Southwest Corridor, to Melnia Cass, and just generally what's happening around us, and how do we also connect people from the neighborhoods to come to our campus, to feel comfortable going through campus, because we do take up a significant amount of space, and it's hard to navigate, although a lot of people do cut through when they need to go from Ruggles to Fenway.
That's interesting. I think so that's helpful context, and then I think that diagram that we're talking about, the one 2 slides up, I think it's definitely one of the more I don't say attractive ones, but it's implying something, and I think what you're saying in terms of that east-west connection, maybe that's something that could be layered on, but it definitely starts to imply, or I see the implication here, the desire to sort of understand the porosity of the campus, to kind of cut through it. But yeah, just distilling what is the takeaway here relative to priorities, like you're saying, in terms of the connection, perhaps east-west. Maybe that's something that can be shown up, that can show up in a diagram like this.
Yeah, we can definitely layer that on.
Can I ask a clarification about Forsyth? So what vehicles use that street?
So it's actually a bus drop off for a number of shuttles. It connects to Ruggles Station. A lot of people have their Uber pickups, drop offs. There's also, I just took a blue bike the other day. They have a dock on Forsyth.
Allegedly the busiest blue bike station in the network, allegedly.
Yes, yeah. You have some kind of shuttles that you pick up. We have our own shuttle to the Burlington campus and our athletic campuses that pick up there. So there is a surprising amount of vehicular traffic. I would say it's not fast, but it's, a decent amount.
Yeah, the reason that I'm asking is because it's kind of prime space as well. It's the connector across the way. And so as you develop details, maybe thinking about how, either traffic calming or something can help with the character of this space, and really kind of give it as much as you can to the open space network. The other thing I have to say, this is just bugging me, and so it doesn't really mean anything, but could you go back to the plan that shows the future conditions? Yeah, that one's great. And if you could zoom in, not that one, the one before, and zoom in. So you've got these spaces. Yay, I get to actually draw in these sessions. So my colleagues know that I like to do that. So you've got these spaces, right? And I understand that there's a cut through here, but things kind of peter off here. I don't know what you can do, but this is going to become this major draw to this end of the campus. And I would think as you're doing Gainsborough that you might really think about how you could strengthen that connection, because you don't know where you're going in the future. And so every opportunity that you can, as you add buildings on, the more that you can strengthen those connections, the better. And, as a landscape architect, I just want to snip that building right there. And I'm not supposed to really be giving you that kind of feedback, but I like the way that these all kind of flow together, and not quite there for me on this end. And it's a lot of open space. It's an important connector. Okay.
Could you elaborate on that a bit? Because I think we are struggling with that corner because, we're thinking of this as a view corridor
Yep.
down Mass Ave.
Yep.
The ability to land at this open space and a nice, transparent building, I think is intriguing.
I
There's a
agree.
fine building, but it might not be the most handsome building on our campus.
Yeah, and I mean, a number of ways you could raise up, the building could start on the second floor so people can see beyond that. But I hear what you're saying. But I think some way for that to feel like it goes through, not just that you enter the building and go to the other side. I find that a bit of a struggle, frankly. Just thinking about, people truly doing that, and seems like a missing link to me. And how that gets resolved, of course, is in your hands. But I think the more that you can, I'm sorry. The more that you can kind of join these spaces and this one, the better, just like you've done here. I mean, that's just such a terrific job of having the green spaces kind of overlap and having these interesting views that kind of cut off, the buildings cut off, so that when you move through the space, there's a surprise there. It's, it's a nice sequence. And so I guess that's what I'm saying. What is the sequencing of that space? How does the landscape and the buildings unfold together?
That's helpful. Thank you.
I can add a few comments. A lot of my comments have already been expressed, which is great. I won't do those again. Chris, when you put up slide 18, I have to say that it was my first real understanding of intentional spines through the campus. And I heard, Jonathan, your comment about, well, why do you need the black lines if it's clear, it's clear. For me, it really helped to explain how you could get from kind of something like this through the campus and have this really clear spine about how you move through. And I really like the idea that you layer your slides 18 to 22. So you're kind of showing this, and then you're also showing maybe some of those other directives and regional open space, because I think that is your powerful message. That is it. And I think it's compelling and it's clear. And I think one of the things we were talking about the last time we were all together on the screen was that the campus is, you've inherited this really complicated urban condition and the campus is confusing. You look at this plan and you say, okay, well, yeah, I could wiggle my way through this campus without too much trouble. But then you don't realize the grade changes and you got to go through buildings to do this. And then, oh my gosh, I get to the corner of the library and I really have no idea which way to go. And so I do think that being almost extra intentional about where these pedestrian spines are will be critical to the success of the plan. And again, this is where I first started seeing that emerge. I also think this is just a really great description of kind of what you've got. And I enjoyed even the chart at the top. And like Laura, the service, I would back out your surface parking lot. I think it would be interesting to see what's left in terms of your service roads. And we completely understand these have to exist. They're multi-purpose, but it might give us an understanding of what residual kind of service areas are left. So I think that would be super helpful. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is connective tissue and Forsyth Street, and these have both been touched on. So Forsyth Street is such a rarity for Northeastern Campus because it goes straight through And it actually gives you these glimpses, these, like Gordon Cullen glimpses into important parts of your campus. It will be the gateway presence when you actually create, I think it was called the Cabot Quad, or the at the corner there.
Forsyth Park.
Forsyth, okay.
Yeah.
So it will be that new location for that. And then you'll have this aperture into the Centennial Commons, which I completely and 100% understand why students really called that the primary space. I mean, all of those dots were on it. And then you're going to have this experience of going over a rail line, which is, for better or worse, part of your campus experience. And then you kind of get to the other side where a lot of your improvements are occurring. So I love the idea that Laura had of making sure that maybe we think about Forsyth as less of a street and more of a pedestrian promenade that happens to have a street go through it. And I think that would change completely the legibility of the campus. And I think that it would really improve kind of your first 15 minutes on campus for your prospective families. And I think it could be really terrific. The connective tissue, the reason I wanted to talk about that, and it's so easy, if you just squint at this diagram, you can see all of that orange popping out. And I think it's mainly paved, right, Chris?
Yeah, it's some of it's brick, but it's a mix of brick and asphalt. And in a few places, especially the newer places, like the plaza between ISEC, or the space between ISEC and EXP along Columbus Ave, granite pavers or concrete unit pavers too. But it's mostly hardscape, although wherever we can get peripheral planting space, we will take it, and we're always looking for more.
And are service vehicles allowed to drive on anything that's orange?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah, I can't think of a single one unless it's it's up a staircase. I can't think of a single one where they are not explicitly prohibited.
I guess what I would suggest, I think that the diagram would be a lot different if the orange became the green, and you began to see the connections between quad green and quad green, and in some cases, quad green and study areas with the blue. And I think because you need to, maintain a right of way for service vehicles to get in and out when that's necessary, which is many times a day, I still wonder if there is a really interesting kind of section that you could create, a Northeastern section, for what that service drive / connective pathway looks like, and whether you can have more of a kind of greening of that orange. And I think by virtue of maybe studying that section, I think then that the diagram would change and be kind of green with green connective tissue. And again, I think that would go a long way to just enhancing the experience or making it feel a little bit more contiguous, which I think is kind of what we're all talking about, or talking about today, and also talked about in our last session with you. So those were really the comments. And then I wanted to end just with the Hertig. And I wondered if you had the diagram you used for that Hertig area the last time we met.
Linda, could I just point out something quickly? You were drawing over the existing open space diagram as opposed to the proposed. Is that correct?
There you go. There's our proposed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, Linda, that we were clear about that.
Wow, we got those to line up.
Yeah, I mean,
that's amazing.
I mean, you showed it first on slide 18, and then you showed it again on slide 24. And I was kind of doing the toggle in my mind, and I'm like, no, the black actually stayed in the same place, which is pretty interesting. Meaning that your existing black lines, or the way that people move through the campus, actually hasn't altered that much through the ones that I traced. But I think now the trick is, how do you make that feel more intuitive and connected? Which I think was kind of the subsequent comment about the connective tissue. But yeah, so for Hertig, I wondered if we could look at the plan that you showed the last time we were together. And then I just wanted, I don't know if it's possible to just like grab a little snip of what you're showing today. And I just wanted to look at them side by side if we could.
So I believe, I'm sorry, this isn't going to be perfect. Okay, I believe this is what we were reviewing last time, correct? We saw it more in a 3D massing.
Okay, we didn't see it in a plan view, is that right, Corey?
No, there was plan. This is it.
This is
Okay.
it. Yep.
Okay, great. Because I think Laura was asking, could you nudge that backward and make the connection to St. Botolph a little clearer? And what I remember of the conversation is that we were ending up with all of these fragmented spaces. But I think that the intent was, can we connect Robinson Quad to St. Botolph in a way, again, that's super legible? And I think by either pulling that edge back from St. Botolph or creating this permanent walkthrough. And when you put that more recent slide up, I also got excited because I thought that you were talking about maybe a double height pass through the building that didn't have doors. And I think that's not what you were describing later on. But I do think that while having the street edge on St. Botolph was one of the asks from our last session, I do think that the other ask was that there was a real intentionality about continuing in a really clear way this pathway that came from St. Botolph. And whether it happens because you've got kind of two forms that you can easily pass through, see through, know what's on the other side of, or whether, a form gets pulled back, because I know that was the other thing that we were kind of toying around with, that it gets pulled back, quite a ways. I think you guys are hearing us, and I appreciate the experimentation of that, and kind of look forward to seeing where that ends up.
Right, I think we were responding to David Hassin's comment on whether we can define a street edge. But I hear, I understand what you're getting at with the better connectivity, and actually the entrance into the arena, which we will talk about in March, happens right at this corner of St. Botolph and Gainsborough, but the door is facing St. Botolph, but the plaza and the entire welcome experience is really at that corner. So enhanced connectivity from campus is something we're striving to achieve.
Yeah. And again, in my mind, do we think about this form really having two parts and allowing that pass through?
Yeah.
I know we're up against 7 o'clock. Commissioners, are there other comments before we see if there are public comments? Christina, are we ready to move to public comment?
Yeah. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised, so we will close the public testimony period. We should identify next steps for the team.
Great, thanks, Christina. So I guess a question to the Northeastern team, does the open space direction from today's meeting kind of feel like a clear jumping off point? And I know we're splitting these sessions kind of topically, and I'm curious what you had in mind for our next discussion.
We discussed with Boston Planning staff that would be around mobility, and then a separate session about massing. My question to the commission is whether is there a preference for sequence, or should we talk about mobility at the same time as we talk about massing, because we really covered a lot of mobility through the open space discussion.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to jump in and say that from the planning department's perspective, I think any conversation about mobility, we would certainly want to wrap up into a conversation that the commissioners might feel is sort of conclusive on a discussion about open space and public realm. So my suggestion to the team and to the commissioners is that the next conversation focus primarily on massing and the massing's relationship to open space, acknowledging that at this time, the team's not pursuing ADB entitlements for any of the projects except for Matthews Arena. So it's really a very high level conversation about massing, and one that we think is going to be complex given the number of PIPs in this IMP. And, the context of Huntington Avenue and, of course, the kind of internal logic of this campus.
I love that idea. I love the idea of going to massing next, because I don't know, it might also give you an opportunity to test some of these open space comments as you're looking at that, and kind of shadow implications and connectivity implications. How do other commissioners feel about Christina's suggestion?
I think that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Great.
Perfect.
I think we have our next steps.
Well, with that, commissioners, we certainly thank you for your time, the proponents' time, members of the public who joined us this evening, and we are almost right on time. Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.